Shabbat Tov.
Shabbat Tov, Miriam.
How are you?
Baruch Hashem, Baruch Hashem. And yourself?
Good. No complaints.
No complaint, absolutely not. It's true. It's true. So do you enjoy your Torah, your study at the other synagogue, your other group?
Yeah, I love it. I
It's a good
I
group.
connect really well with them.
Good.
So, are you doing it with Dove during the week?
With Dove during the week.
Yeah, you like it?
Yes. Yes. It's good. No problem. No problem. We are 4 or 5 people. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So we're 7 most of the time.
Good.
So I started doing it with them because I was going in person.
Yes.
And, right. So the time was better for me. So yeah. So then I continue. I like it. I mean, but Ellie is special. So
Yes, Eli is special. Yeah. He reads very clearly. His Hebrew reading is very clear.
And he only has like a Hebrew Gemara, and he knows all the translations, all the meanings, he's really on point. And yeah, he speaks in a way that is very concise and very easy.
Very precise and clear.
Yeah, no matter the level that you're at, you're like, yeah, you understand what he's talking about. Thursday.
It was quite interesting, all those phrases about those letters that yesterday or today.
I loved it.
I think it demanded more. Yeah.
That was amazing.
It was quite something to mine. It was like a treasure to mine.
Yeah.
I was in awe of those letters and those words and those phrases and those.
Yeah.
And the acronym, Abraham being the name of an acronym, remember?
Yeah. Yeah. Everything is like
quite something.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
it was unexpected, and
yeah, it was good. It was good. It's like, once in a while you have like this stuff that is like really special. That's yeah.
Like a gem.
Mm-hmm. So when are you starting your new program?
In the end of the summer.
Okay. So did you figure out like flights for Israel yet or not yet?
Not yet, because I'm not an Israeli citizen, so I need a special request.
Okay, so you have to wait basically.
Yeah.
They're gonna open it up, but like hopefully. So.
But they say that today there is like 1,000 cases.
Hi everyone, Shabbat Tov.
Shabbat Tov.
I'm sorry I'm a little late. I had some technical issues. But hopefully we're here. We got some running to do. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Let's do this. So Shabbat Tov everyone. Today's daf is daf Kuf Vav, 106 in Shabbat. And I'm not sure where to start. I'm going to start.
The problem is we didn't Friday. He didn't. He just got up to.
Do you want to learn from the Mishnah? Do you guys want? Does everyone have the patience for that?
That's the problem.
I will do it. We have to do it quickly because I have people waiting for me.
Yeah.
Let's try. That's fine. Let's start from the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Hey Amud, top of Kuf Hey. Okay, I'll go faster than usual. How's that? But stop me if it's not clear, because that's not the goal.
Oh, go ahead.
So the Mishnah on top of Kufay on the bet, we have top line. I think that's what he got up to. it says hakoreya b'chamato. Let's say a person tears on Shabbat. We said it's a melacha, but if a person tears out of anger, or they tear al mito, they tear because someone in their family or someone died for them. In those cases, or kol mikalkalin, or someone who is destroying something, so they're tearing and not doing it in a constructive way, they're paturim. Because remember that on Shabbat, you only chayav if you do something constructive. Continues the Mishnah of HaMekalkel, Menat L'Takein, if you tear in order to fix, meaning it's something that's going to lead to a constructive activity, then Shiran Kimitakein. And the shear of the amount you have to tear is the amount that you would have to fix. So, the width from the finger to the thumb, let's say, if you're tearing that much, let's say you often tear a baguette to resew it, to make it cleaner, to make it neater, that would be a shear like fixing it. Now, shiur hamilabein, this we discussed earlier, the shear of thread, basically, of milabein is when you clean it, what you whiten it, minabis when you comb it, soveya when you dye it, tavet when you weave it. All of those are kimalei rochel asit kaful. It's like double the width between you can see my fingers, I hope here, my V, right, between these two fingers. So double that width. That's called sit. This is rochel asit, from here to here, and sit kaful would be double that. Continues the Mishnah. If you are sewing together or weaving together two strings, the size is the size as I showed you between two fingers. So if you weave that much length, then you're chayav on Shabbat. We've quoted all this before. Ask the Gemara, how can you say in our Mishnah that if you tear out of anger or for a mate that you're patur, it says in a Braita, if you tear in anger or for an avel, for a dead person, for a mate, chayav, says the Mishnah. This says the Braita. You're chayav. The Shabbat, even though you did it on Shabbat, you're mechal Shabbat and you're chayav a lot. You fulfilled your obligation. Right? If a person's close family member dies, they're supposed to tear kriya. Even if you did on Shabbat, which you're not supposed to, you did what you're supposed to do. So how could the Braita contradict the Mishnah? Depends whether it's your own family member who died, where you have to tear kriya, and then doing it is a constructive thing because you're fulfilling your obligation. And you're high on Shabbat. But if it's just a stam mate, someone you're upset about because they died, then you're not yotzei. Then it's not considered constructive, and therefore it's like mikalkel, like destroying something on Shabbat, and you're patur. Says Gemara, hametokatani. Our Mishnah said, hakoreya b'chamato v'al meito, you're patur. It was your own family member. So how can you say it's some random person or someone else? Says Gemara, no. It could be your family member, but you're not chayav to tear kriya on every family member. L'olam d'meiti day. It's something close to the person. Remember, a person only sits avelut or tears kriya for someone who's what the Torah describes as one of his close relatives: mother, father, sister, brother, and child. Right? Those are the examples with the Kohen. So and beno bito, there's two, right? So other people, you don't necessarily, spouse might fall into that. That's not so simple, but you don't have to tear kriya. So if a person's second cousin died, let's say, and they ripped on Shabbat for that, that would be considered mikalkel, and they would be put to it. Says Gemara, but even if it's not a close relative, if the person was wise, chacham generally means a talmid chacham, right? Then you should be chayav to tear kriya, and therefore if you did it, it's something constructive on Shabbat. The Tanya, what's that based on? The Braita says, chacham shemet. If a talmid chacham dies, hakol krovav. Everyone is their relative. What do you mean hakol krovav? They're related to everyone. Hakol kikrovav. Everyone is treated like an intimate relative because a talmid chacham has an impact on everyone's life, and so you have to tear. As the Braita continues, hakol korim alav, hakol chotzim alav. Not just it means that you would tear your shirt so you can see your skin. So you tear it off. Everyone has to go eat the meal that you eat after the funeral in the street, in the road. Says you're right. Our Mishnah has to be referring to the lav chacham. Person is not a chacham, so it's your second cousin who's not a talmid chacham, and therefore you don't have a chiyuv of kriya. And if you do it on Shabbat, it's not considered constructive. There's about 1 second. Even if he's not a Talmid Chacham, I Adam Kasherhu, if it's a good person, then you're still chayav. Chiyuvei mechayev. You still have to tear kriya on an Adam Kasher. Again, how you define Adam Kasher is not so obvious, but let's just say a good person, a quality person. Tanya, as the Braita says, why does it sometimes happen that a person's children will die when they are young, even though obviously they haven't sinned in their lives, they're not old enough to be chayav for anything? Says the Braita, so that a person should cry and mourn instead of another person. What? It doesn't make any sense. For the future, avona shakli, we're taking a guarantee from you, meaning we're taking a price from someone because of something that's going to happen in the future. Elo means as because a person did not properly cry and mourn and feel pained by the death of an Adam Kasher, as the Braita says, Shekol habocheh al Adam Kasher, person who cries and mourns for a quality person who dies, because of the respect that a person gave for someone else who deserves it, get forgiven. And what the Braita says is that sometimes, God forbid, a person is punished and has their minor children die, and they're obviously for that because they didn't mourn properly the way they were supposed to for in Adam Kasher. So therefore, ask the Gemara in our Mishnah, if you kriya for a person who's an Adam Kasher, you're also doing something constructive because you're supposed to do that. You're right. Lo tzricha delav Adam Kasher. So the case in the Mishnah again, it's your relative who's a distant relative, who's not a Talmid Chacham, who's not an Adam Kasher. But still, a person is with the recently departed at the time that they died. If the person is in the room when they actually expire, they're also chayav to ter kriya. Chiyuvei mechayev. Reb Shimon ben Elazar omer, ha'omer ha'amet b'shat yitziat neshama. A person is standing with now they're a mate, but they were not. They were goses, I guess, before. When they actually die, chayav l'kra. They have to ter kriya, even if the person's not righteous and good and their relative. What is this comparable to? It's the Sefer Torah shenisraf. God forbid, seeing a Sefer Torah be burned in front of you. Rashi says every person has some mitzvot in them, has some learning. Every Jewish person, Rashi says, has some learning, some mitzvot, some connection. And so seeing that life be taken from them or leave them is like watching a Sefer Torah be burned, chas v'shalom. So it has to be where you were not there when the person died. And all of these cases this is what the Mishnah is referring to, is where you tore kriya when you didn't have to. And therefore it's not constructive, it's destructive. And therefore you're patur on Shabbat. As well, okay, that's meito. I got tenach meito. You explained the contradiction in the Braita and the Mishnah about a person who died. Elachamato or chimato maybe. Achimato kasha. What about the anger? Remember our Mishnah said if you tear your clothing out of anger, you're patur on Shabbat because it's destructive. The Braita says if you tear out of anger, you're chayav. It says chimato nami lo kasha. That's also not a kasha because it depends on the very famous machloket of Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Of Rabbi Yehuda, the Mishnah is Rabbi Shimon who says you're patur, and the Braita is Rabbi Yehuda who says you're chayav. Of Rabbi Yehuda the Amar melacha shein tzrucha legufa chayav aleh. Rabbi Yehuda always says if you do a melacha, but you don't need the guf of the melacha, you do it for a secondary purpose, you are chayav. And this is a perfect example, right? You're tearing something, you don't want the thing to be torn. You're tearing it because you're angry. So you're tearing it to get some steam off, to get, everyone knows you punch the wall and, you feel better. So you're doing it not because you want the thing to be torn. You're doing it to get your anger out. That's a malacha she'enot tzricha legufa. You don't need the object of the malacha. And therefore, I according to Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon damar malacha she'enot tzricha legufa patur aleh. That is, Rabbi Shimon says you're patur. Wait 1 second. Amar deshamalei Rabbi Yehuda b'mitakein. Right? We only know Rabbi Yehuda says that when you're actually doing something constructive. You just don't want to do that necessarily. It happens on its own, right? The famous example of pulling the chair, where you make a charitz, you make a row in the ground to plant in. You didn't do it for that function, but it happens. Mikalkel, nisham lay. This is not mikalkel. If a person is angry and they tear something in their anger, hanami mitakenu, they're fixing something. That's not for God. That's what it usually means, right? Nachat ruach liyotzro here means his own yetzer. This person is very angry, right? And by tearing this thing, and everyone's done that, right? By punching the wall or grabbing something or whatever you're doing, you get some of your I don't know what the proper psychological term is, but you transfer some of your anger into this thing. And so although the act itself is not the goal, you don't really care about ripping the phone book, right? You want to get rid of your anger, and therefore you're accomplishing something. And according to Yehuda, you would still be chayav. James, in case you're wondering, we're on Kof Hey Amabet. James, excuse me. Around 4 lines up from the bottom of the narrow lines. So that's where we are. Says the Gemara, now, are you allowed to do this? If you are very angry, are you allowed to take your anger out on the nearest wall, right? The phone book in this case. Can you express your anger by ripping something up, by destroying something? But Tanya, we learned in a Braita, Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer Mishum Chilfa bar Igra, that is an interesting name. Shana Amar Mishum Reb Yochanan ben Yuri, Hareya bigadav b'chamato. If a person tears their shirt out of anger, you rip your shirt off. Or mishaber kilav b'chamato, or you break your pots, right? You throw the glass against the wall because you're so angry. Or mifazer ma'otav b'chamato, you burn your money because you're so angry. All of these things, it's as if the person worshipped avodah zarah. This is the unato means the profession, right? This is the modus operandi of the yetzer hara. Hayom omer lo asekach. Yetzer hara just wants to control you. It wants you to lose control. Today it says, do this. You're angry, do something destructive. Next day, yetzer hara gives you advice to do something else. It's the first step in the path of avodah zarah, because avodah zarah is ultimately listening to your yetzer hara to do something that you're not supposed to do, and any expression of losing control is not quite avodah zarah, but it's on the way, and we view that as any loss of control. And so, how could you talk about in our Mishnah as someone who wants to, do something destructive to get rid of her anger? That's inappropriate.
Wouldn't it be also bal tashchid?
It could be, but you could also rip something and maybe, I don't know, you can reconstruct maybe, right? If you rip a shirt, you can sew it back together potentially. But
If you throw away your money.
that's true. Fazer literally means you spread it out. But yeah, you're right. It is bal tashchid. Amar Reb Avin, says Reb Avin, just to finish the statement, Ma'ikra, from which pasuk do you see that this is wrong? It says, Lo yeh b'cha el zar. You shouldn't have inside of you a foreign god. Meaning you shouldn't give in to any instincts. You shouldn't let your body or your anger or your emotions tell you what to do. And you shouldn't bow down to an evil god, a foreign god. So you see that avodah zarah is very similar to giving in to your desires. What is a foreign god that people have? That's your yetzer hara, right? That's the person inside of you or the thing inside of you that's telling you to do things destructive. That's what you're right. But here, you didn't do this out of anger. You didn't show people that you're angry. So it was a play thing, meaning you weren't so frustrated that you tore your begadim, which wanted your kids to realize that you're so angry. So you tore it so that you instill fear in them. You did it tactically. Right, the Rambam always talks about this. He said you can't be angry, but you can show anger to make people think you're angry. So that's what you did here. Yehad Rav Yehuda, Shalit Matzvaita. Rav Yehuda used to rip off his clothing when someone was, someone asked a bad question in Shir or something, right? He would rip off his shirt to say how angry he was. Or Taver Mani Tavira. Rav Yaakov would break the dishes. I think that's what it means. Rav Sheshet Ramile La'amte Munina Aresha. Rav Sheshet would Arashi was fish juice. He would pour the fish juice on your head. You asked a bad question. Rav Abba Tavar Nachmat Nachtama, and Rav Abba used to break. Rash's Nachtama is the tops of the pots, right? He would break the earthenware. So all these rabbis would do things that were startling to their families and their students, but they didn't do it out of anger. They did it out of showing that they were angry. So it was the show. And you're allowed to do that. While we're on the topic of mourning people, anytime a person cries for the death of a upstanding person, God counts those tears and stores them in God's storage place. As it says in the pasuk of Tehillim, Nodi safarta ata sima mati benodecha. I count your tears, or this is literally say tears, but I count your nodes, drips. I put your tears in the container. Hello b'sifratecha. I am keeping track of them. Anyone who is lazy and does not put appropriate effort into mourning a chacham who dies, that person deserves to be buried. Rashis b'chayav means in his natural life, meaning before his time. Shenemar, as it says, by Yoshua, the Chazal felt that Yoshua did not get the proper respect when he died. Because unlike Moshe and Aaron, where it says they mourned them for 30 days, it says nothing was said by Yoshua. It says, they buried Yoshua at the border of his portion, the Timnat Serach, Asher Bahar Ephraim. They buried Yoshua at Har Ephraim because of course Yoshua came from not from Ephraim, but he was near Ephraim. He came from Ephraim, as we had in this week's parasha, sorry. Yoshua was from Ephraim in the Meraglim, and he was mitzafon the Har Ga'ash. Har Ga'ash. So Har Ga'ash, it sounds like Ga'ash is a tremor, an earthquake, right? What's the mountain of earthquakes? Melamed shiragash alehem ahar lohargan, that the mountain trembled as if to fall and kill them, because it was a sign from God that they were not properly mourning or saying hespedim on Yoshua, and that God was angry and was going to destroy them. Of course, there are earthquakes, as you know, in Har Ephraim. Anyways, Rabbi Yechia bar Abba Rabbi Yochanan, kol mitatzel b'esmido shel chacham, anyone who is mitatzel, again, who's not sufficiently appropriately sad or active in the hesped of a chacham, eino ma'arich yamim. They don't live a long time, or they don't live as long as they were supposed to live. That's mida keneged mida. That you get paid back in the way that you sinned. So you did not respect the life of this person, so your life will be cut short as well. Ask the Gemara, how could that be? When you look at the next pasuk in Yoshua, it says in the next pasuk in Yoshua that after he died, the people served Hashem all the days of Yoshua, and all the elders, they lived for a long time after Yoshua. But you just said that no one's going to live for a long time after Yoshua because they were not maspidim properly. Said Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi, that's the kind of question you hear in Bavel. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan was in Eretz Yisrael. So Rabbi came up from Bavel. I'm like, Bavlai, that's a Babylonian question. It says, Harichu Yamim. Yamim Harichu. They lived for more days. But Shanim Lo Harichu. They didn't live for more years. So Harichu Harachat Yamim is not a good thing. It just means you live for more days. It says, well, that's ridiculous. Everyone reads Shema, El Me'ata, it says, L'man Yerbu Yimechem Yimei V'nechem, right? L'man Yerbu Yimechem. So saying in the pasuk then is that you're going to live for many days? Yimechem? Yamim V'lo Shanim? No, Bracha Shanim. When we're giving a blessing, then we take it generously. But when it's not a blessing, then Yamim means that they only live more days, but not necessarily more years. Okay, a little more Agadita before we actually get to today's stuff. If you have a family of siblings that are close together and one of them dies, that's not a very good sign. They should all be a little bit nervous. What do? You obviously do, but it's a sign that there's something wrong in that group. Or it continues the Gemara. If you have a cluster, a group, a chabura that's together for learning or for business or something, and one of them dies, tidad kol chabura kula. It's make everyone nervous. Now some say that means demeit gadol, if the greatest person in the group dies, because it's a sign that maybe they're all threatened. Amrila demeit katan, something the opposite. It means if the youngest, not the youngest, the smallest of them, the least great of them dies, because that's the way of the Yetzer Hara or Satan. You come for the young people, the lower people, and you work your way up. They should all be concerned, and they should do what you can do when you're concerned. Anyways, continue the Mishnah. In general, if a person does something on Shabbos that's destructive, not constructive, you're a pater for Chil Shabbos. Rabbi Avo kamed Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Avo said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, I have a brayta that says, Kol mikalkalin piturin chutz michovel mavir. Anytime a person does something destructive on Shabbat, they are patur except for two melachot. The melacha of mikalkel, chovel, of like wounding someone, causing someone to bleed, is usually how I understand chovel. So if you cut someone and they bleed, that's by definition a destructive act, and you're still chayav on Shabbat. And in ma'avir, which is burning something, if you burn something, that's also destructive, but you're still chayav on Shabbat. Amar lei, Rabbi Yochanan said to Rabbi Avo, that's wrong. Puk tani livra. Take that Tana, that Braita, and get out and send it out of here. Erase that one. That's not a good one. I don't agree. Because chovel ma'avir eno mishnah. Nobody said, or not correctly, that chovel and ma'avir are chayav on Shabbat if they are destructive. Im tamalomar mishnah. And if you did learn it in a mishnah or a Braita, that's because there are times where they are constructive. For example, let's say a person really wants blood on Shabbat. Why would you want blood? I don't know. But it says, for whatever reason, I don't really know why, your kelev really needs blood on Shabbat. So you cut yourself or you cut someone to bleed them so that the dog or the animals can get the blood. I'm not exactly sure that if this was a common thing or not. But either way, you did it for the purpose of getting some benefit. Now you'll realize that, as we discussed earlier today, that's probably a melacha. It doesn't have to be a person. It has to be something constructive. So if the blood's going to be useful, right, for the dog, then it's something that's constructive on Shabbat. It is a melacha she'ino tzricha legufa, right? Clear. So it has to be going to Rabbi Yehuda, right? Presumably, because otherwise, what's the benefit of this, right? And furthermore, ma'avir, what's a fire? Can a fire be constructive? But tzarich la'afaro, you want the ashes. Let's say really Erev Tisha B'Av maybe. And so, no. It could be. There is an issur of bleeding an animal as well, I'm sure. But by a kelev, by a avara, by fire, it's where you need the ashes. It says, okay, now even according to Rabbi Avo, how could Rabbi Avo say that the Braita means chovel ma'avir is chayav on Shabbat? Even if it's constructive, our Mishnah, even if it's destructive, our Mishnah says that kol mekalkalin are peturim. Says Rabbi Avo, Matnitin Rabbi Yehuda, and brought to Rabbi Shimon. I would tell you that our Mishnah is going according to Rabbi Yehuda, and the Braita is going according to Rabbi Shimon. Why? Let's just read it. It's a little complicated. My time at Rabbi Shimon, again, the way Rabbi Avo understands the Braita is that the Braita is saying is that any melacha on Shabbat that's destructive is patur, with two exceptions. Two exceptions are chavala, if you make a wound, and havara, if you burn something. Why would those be exceptions? Says the Gemara, because my time at Rabbi Shimon, the mishra mila. as we're going to see in a few weeks in the parak of Milah, the Torah, we darshan from a pasuk that you're allowed to do a brit milah on Shabbat. Okay? Ubayom hashmini we darshan, extra vav, even on Shabbat. Okay? So says Rabbi Shimon, why in the world would the Torah have to tell you how to do a brit milah on Shabbat? What's wrong with doing a brit milah? As people may have seen a brit milah or heard about it, you cut off some of the skin and you cause bleeding, right? Yep, James is amazed. In my family, we haven't had this, but I hear about this thing. So you have to cut it, and there's bleeding. So why would the Torah tell you you're allowed to do that on Shabbat? What's wrong with it? It must be that you're not allowed to cut someone to bleed on Shabbat, right? And the Torah is saying that although generally you can't cut someone to bleed, for Brit Milah, you're allowed to do it. So that's a specific pasuk telling you that even though cutting someone to bleed is usually destructive, it's still asur on Shabbat. Says Rabbi Shimon, because the pasuk needs to tell you that you're allowed to do Brit Milah on Shabbat. It must be that usually you can't cut someone on Shabbat, even though it's destructive. And furthermore, now we're going to have this in a long time, I guess, in Sanhedrin. The Gemara is going to learn out there that, remember, there's an aver, one of the beitin is streifa, is burning someone, right? So we're going to learn later in a few years that you cannot do that on Shabbat. We learn from a pasuk that you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat. Why did the Torah tell me? Why did the Torah say you're not allowed to do it on Shabbat? What's wrong with burning something on Shabbat? Destructive. It must be that since the Torah said you cannot do it on Shabbat, you see that in general, havara is chayev, even though it's destructive. And so says Rabbi Shimon, these are two exceptions, right? The exceptions are making a wound from Brit Milah and burning something where the Torah specifically says you can't do it on Shabbat. So that's where I say, says Rabbi Avo, because of Rabbi Shimon, that every avera on Shabbat is permitted or it's not asur if it's destructive, except for these two things, except for wounds and burning. Says Rabbi Yehuda, no, neither one of those are good examples. Because hatam mitakenu, both of those cases are things that are constructive. For example, look at Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says, Mali takin milah, mali takin kli. You got to think of Brit Milah as you're finishing off the vessel, you're finishing off the kli. It's like cutting the top off a closed container. You got to open it up.
Makeh patish, I mean, that gives a whole different.
It might be makeh patish, but it's or you could say it's tikkun kli. You're making it work better. Again, that's what they said. And if you remember Sreifa, if you recall from Sanhedrin, the way they killed people by burning them, they did not put them. It was not on flames, right? They would heat up some metal, like lead, we say, or whatever metal they use, and then they would pour that down their throats, which is not fun, I'm sure, right? But the Isser is heating up the metal to melt it. The Gemara, that's not destructive. Every time you heat up metal to make it liquid, you're building it so you can form it into whatever you want, right? So Mali Levashel P'tiva, Mali Levashel Samanim. So cooking the lead, or whatever metal, I don't think it was lead, I don't know if it's refining it. Is that what refining? I thought refining is where you separate different parts of it. Either way, you're making it into a liquid so that you can do whatever you want with it. That's the same as heating up spices. So therefore, that's why it says Rabbi Yehuda, you're chayav for that on Shabbat, but it's not because it's destructive. Now, the Mishnah said Shira Melabain is Kimalei Rochav Hasit Kaful, which I showed you is this. Your middle finger to your index, that's called your index, right? Your index to your middle finger. So we said it's double. So Rav Yosef Machli Kaful. Rav Yosef would show double. He would go like this. No. This. And double. Right? That's double. You got it? And Reb Chia Bar Ami said Machli Pashut. He would just show this distance. Because the distance between your thumb and your first finger is equivalent to double the distance between these two fingers. You test it out at home. Continues the Mishnah. We're going to go for maybe a few more minutes, okay? I know we started behind. We'll get there. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the next malacha that we have is Seidah, trapping on Shabbat. You're not allowed to trap a living animal on Shabbat. Says Rabbi Yehuda, what does trapping mean? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Omer Hadsad Tzipor Migdal. You trap a bird in a tower. As everybody knows from Rapunzel, what's unique about a tower is that there's no way out. There's no windows in the tower. It's closed. And so Rabbi Yehuda says, Hadsad Tzipor Migdal, if you trap a bird in a tower, or a tzvila bayit, or a deer, or a similar animal to a deer into a house, then you're chayav. If you close the door and trap it in, then you're chayav for trapping on Shabbat. The Chachamim Omrim, Tzipor Migdal, I agree with you about a bird in a migdal. Rashi points out, as opposed to a house, meaning if a bird flies into your house and you close the door, that's not called trapping because the bird can fly out the window, right? Now, as everybody who's been in a house with a bird knows, it might take a while until it flies out the window, but eventually it'll get the window, right? But a tzvi, of course, cannot fly out the window, I guess assuming they're not low windows. The Chachamim say, a tzipor l'migdal, I agree, but a tzvi would be considered trapping not only if it was in a house, I think the Bach adds the word bayit, yeah. L'bayit, u'legina, u'lechatzer, u'lebibarim. In all of these places, whether you trap the deer in your house, or your garden, or your courtyard, or your barim, which is your, I don't know how to translate in English, they say vivarium, which is not an English word, but your place where you collect your animals, your zoo, right? In any of those places, you're chayav, meaning in more cases than Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says it's got to be in the house. The Chachamim are saying even into your garden, even into your chatzer, which is presumably a more open space, you're still chayav. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, one second. Lo kol habibarim shavim. Not all these vivariums are the same. Zeh, depends on how big it is. If you still have not trapped it, meaning it's enclosed, but you'd have to run after it to get it, then you're patur because you haven't quite trapped it. It's in a confined space, but not a space that you can easily get it. But if it's not missing any action on your part to trap it, then you're chayav. Okay. Says the Gemara, remember there's a Mishnah in, it depends. So, well, let's see the Gemara. It'll answer all your questions about birds in the tower. Says the Gemara, it's not. Now, if you recall, there's a Mishnah in Beitza. Remember that in terms of Yom Tov, which is a mistake that people commonly make, not people in Daf Yomi, but people commonly make, they think that you're allowed to do anything for Ochel Nefesh on Yom Tov, right? But that's not the case. As the Gemara and the Mishnah says very clearly, you can only do things on Yom Tov that you couldn't have done before Yom Tov, right? So things that would have been just as easily done before Yom Tov, you're not allowed to do on Yom Tov. For example, if you want to eat a fish on Yom Tov, you can't catch it on Yom Tov. You have to catch it before, right? Now, everybody knows if you kill your fish on Friday, it's not going to taste as good on Yom Tov, right? But you can take it and put it in a little aquarium on your kitchen counter and leave it there so that you don't have to catch it on Yom Tov. You could just kill it on Yom Tov, which you're allowed to do, right? So says the Mishnah in Beitza, Ein sadim dagim min habibarim b'Yom Tov. You have a fish pond, right? You cannot capture your fish, your tilapia, from the fish pond on Yom Tov because you could have caught it before Yom Tov and put it in a small container. So you're not allowed to catch it on Yom Tov. The ain notes the name is onot, and because you're not allowed to, well, this is still trickier. You're not allowed to feed it on Yom Tov. Why can't you feed your fish on Yom Tov? So Rashi explains because you're only allowed to feed things that need you for survival. But a fish, of course, can always eat a different fish. That's what Rashi says, right? The big fish can eat the little fish, or maybe your fish pond had grass growing, so it can always eat the grass, right? Obviously, if it's in a fish tank where there's no grass, you're allowed to feed it, right? But says the Mishnah, you cannot give it food on Shabbat. Aval chayav oaf. You can capture a chayav oaf on Yom Tov because they don't taste as good if you catch them before Yom Tov, right? The notes in lefnehem mizonot, and you're allowed to feed them on Yom Tov. As for that's the Mishnah. There's a Braita, and the Braita says, if you have a bibar, did anyone find an English word for bibarim? No one found one yet. Okay, I'll say vivarium still. which I don't know if anyone knows what that means, like an aquarium for animals. If you have a container, or not a container, a space, where you keep your chayot, your ofot, your dagim, you can't trap from any of them on Yom Tov. Mizonot. So the Braita says you can't do it. James will call it an enclosure. So kasha chaya chaya, the Mishnah said you're allowed to capture a chaya from inside your enclosure on Yom Tov, and the Braita says you can't. And kasha ofot ofot. Again, the Mishnah said you can capture a bird, and the Braita said you can't. So Bishma chaya chaya lo kasha, that's easy. Because remember, our Mishnah had two opinions, Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda said that putting a deer into a house is considered capturing it, but putting it into your chatzer is not considered capturing it. And therefore, if it was in the chatzer or the pen on Shabbat, you're not allowed to capture it from that because it's considered doing malacha. And the Chachamim said putting it into the chatzer is also called capturing it. And so if you put it into the chatzer before Yom Tov, you can capture it on Yom Tov because it's already caught. So Bishlama chaya chaya lo kasha. Where am I? Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan, like our Mishnah. Ela ofota ofot kasha, because in our Mishnah, remember there was no disagreement about the ofot. Everybody agreed that if it was okay, I like all the words. Everybody agreed in our Mishnah that if the bird was in a tower, it's considered caught. But if it's in a house, it's not considered caught. So how could you say that on Yom Tov you can or you cannot catch it? Because we're ofot nami lo kasha. Ha bibar mikura, ha bibar sheino mikura. No, the difference is whether you have a bird trap that has a roof on top of it, right? If it has a roof on top of it, then it's caught. And then it's caught before Yom Tov, and you can take it out on Yom Tov. But if there's no roof on top of the bird catching thing, then the bird could just fly away. And although it might not know that right away, right? Maybe it's 10 feet tall, the bird doesn't realize that it can fly away, but taking it on Yom Tov is catching it. 1 second. I'll buy it. A house has a roof, right? Dimukorehu, it has a roof, hopefully. Both Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan agree that a tzipor is only considered caught if it's in a tower, but not in a house, because it can fly out the window. No, there's different kinds of birds. Some birds, if you get them in a house, even if the window's open, it will take them a very long time to find that window. I'm sure people have had birds in their house and realize you can open the door and they'll take the bird, 2 hours till it finds that door and it'll destroy everything in the house, right? But some birds are very comfortable finding the open door. And those birds are called tzipor dror, which, tzipor dror, what is a tzipor dror? A tzipor dror means a bird that loves its freedom. Rashi says that's not what it means. Rashi says it's a bird that is comfortable in a house. Used to flying in and out of the house, right? It's a not domesticated, but a family bird. And so it easily finds its way out. And so the fish mekabel marut, it doesn't accept being trapped inside the house. The Tanna Bear of Yishmael, Lama Nikra Shma Tzipar Dwar, Neshadar Babayim Kibisadeh. It's very comfortable in the house, just like in the field. Meaning this is the bird will fly in the house, like it's in Grand Central, right? It'll fly right out. It's not feeling any kind of pressure being in that space. Says the Gemara, well, now that you said there's different kinds of pens, I don't need to say that the Braita and the Mishnah of Achaya was Machlok, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. It could be going according to Rabbanan entirely. Ha bebibar gadol, ha bebibar katan. Depends on how big your enclosure is, which makes a lot of sense, right? If you have a very big enclosure, then having an animal in that is not considered trapped. And therefore on Shabbat you're not chayav. And on Yom Tov, you're not allowed to trap it, to eat it. But if it's a small enclosure, then consider trapping it on Shabbat, and it's considered already trapped if you had it there before Yom Tov. Now, of course, how do you define a big enclosure and a small enclosure? Hechidami bibar gadol, hechidami bibar katan. Amar Vashi, it depends on how hard it is to catch it. Which probably means one breath, meaning you don't have to stop and catch your breath. You could just grab it real easily. That's considered a bibar gadol, bibar katan. Bibar katan. The idach, and if it's bigger than that, then you got to chase it around. Then it's a bibar gadol or inami. Let's say you have a small enough courtyard that the shade from one wall falls onto the second wall, meaning it's such a small space that when the sun comes up, and it has to obviously not be the first thing in the morning, but let's say, sometime in the morning, say 3 hours a day. I think Rashi and Beitza gives a time. I don't remember what it is, but sometime in the day that the sunlight on the wall, on a standard size 4 wall, won't extend to the opposite wall, meaning it's 4 to 6 amot wide. But later in the day, or I'm sorry, if it's bigger than that, it's a bibar gadol. Irach bibar gadol. Inami kohecha deleka uksi uksi. If it doesn't have little side parts where the animal can hide or escape, then it's considered a bibar katan. But if it does, idach bibar gadol. So either way, if it's hard to get the animal, it's considered a bibar gadol, not considered trapped. And if it's easy to get to it, it's considered a bibar katan. Let's do a few more. Let's try to get to the Mishnah. Okay, everyone's got 5 minutes left. 5 minutes. Begrudging. Okay. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel said that it depended on. It said lo kol habibarin shavin. Amar Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha Reb Shimon ben Gamliel. That's how we pass it. Amalei Abaye. What halacha michlal de pligi? Who argues with him? The Mishnah didn't have any other opinions. Amalei said, "My nafka l'chamina." Why do you care if I say the halacha is like him? There's no one who argues with him. Obviously, that's the halacha. I said back to him, well, come on. This is serious stuff. Gemara, Gamor. We're learning the Gemara here. Zimmerate is like a song to you? It's just words? We don't say things unless they're absolutely necessary. You shouldn't say the halacha is like Reb Shimon ben Gamliel, and no one disagrees with him. Taner Rabbanan, on the same topic, Hatzad Tzni. If you capture a deer on Shabbat, but it's a blind deer, suma, or yashin, or it's a sleeping deer. How do you capture a sleeping deer? Right? It falls asleep in your house and you clock the door. You lock the door, right? In those cases, you're chayav. But if it's a chiger, if it's a lame deer, like Bambi, or it's zakin, that was Bambi, right? It was lame or something? No? Maybe. Or it's zakin, or it's a very old deer, or a koleh, or it's a sick deer, then you're patur. Why? Because the deer is not free to run around. So what do you mean you're trapping it? It's not escaping. So in all those cases, even if you close the door in front of it, that's not considered trapping it. It's already trapped. Amalei Abaye Rav Yosef, Ma'ishnahani, U'Ma'ishnahani. What's the difference? Because Hani Avidi the Ravui, these can run away. If the deer is sleeping, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen a sleeping deer. If you wake it up, it'll run away. Or if it's blind, it is easily going to run away from you. But Hani, Lo Avidi the Ravui, these can't run away. Ask for I, but the Braita says, Atanya Chol Chayav, that if it's a sick deer and you capture it, you're still chayav. Rav Sheshet, depends on what kind of sickness it has. Lo kasha. If the deer's got a fever, like a regular corona kind of thing, then, well, maybe that's not a good example. 1 second. It has a regular fever, then even though it's sick and it's resting, if you go next to it, it's going to jump up and run away. But if it's chola machmat uvtzina, if it's chola because of, uvtzina, it means ayefut. But I think it means something like corona, meaning a respiratory illness. So it can't breathe, then it can't run away, right? So if it's got a lung illness, then you're patur for trapping it because it's already trapped. But if it's just got a fever, it might be tired, but it's going to be able to run away from you. Taner Rabbanan, again, quickly, Hatzad Chagavim, to capture grasshoppers, or gazin, which is a different type of grasshopper, Sir'in v'Itushin, which we usually translate as mosquitoes and lice. I don't know if that's right, but that's how we translate it. The Shabbat chayav. If you capture any of these things on Shabbat, you're chayav. So if you capture, not if you kill, that's a different problem. But if you capture a grasshopper or any of these things, you're chayav on Shabbat. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim Amrin, that's no. Kol sheb'mino nitzot chayav. If people normally capture this thing because they eat it, like a grasshopper, you're chayav. But kol she'ein b'mino nitzot, nobody's capturing mosquitoes, then you're patur. Tanya Idach, another Braita says, Hatzad Chagavim, if you capture grasshoppers, then it depends on whether the ground is wet or not. The Shat Hatal, if it's the time that the ground is wet, when there's dew, then you're patur. Because it sounds like, according to this, that grasshoppers, their wings get wet and they're not able to fly away when the grass is wet. And so capturing them doesn't do anything because they're already caught, meaning anybody can go pick it up. So the fact that you put a cage on top of it doesn't do anything extra. But if it's Bishat Hashrav, the time when it's dry in the middle of the day, then they fly around a lot, and then you're chayav. And Elazar ben Mahavai Omer, if there's so many grasshoppers, like the cicadas that come, cicadas, and they're everywhere, then you're patur if you capture. Ask Mar 1 second. Are you referring to the Reisha or the Seifa? Elazar ben Mahavai, a Reisha Kai, where we said that if it's wet, that you're not chayav for capturing them. Does he come to say only if there's millions of them? Oh, I say for Kai, to say even if it's dry and you're chayav, you're not chayav if they're everywhere. Tashma, so we have a brayta which says it very clearly. Hatzad chagavim, if you capture, meaning you catch a grasshopper, if it's bishat hatal, if it's wet outside, then you're patur, because they're not very good at running away, and so you're not doing anything. And you're patur on Shabbat. Bishat hashrav, if it's when it's dry out, then you're chayav. And Azar ben Mahavai Omer afilu bishat hashrav mayim chot about patur. If they're just coming in clusters, there are waves of them, then there's nothing about catching it. You're just grabbing one out of the air, and then you are patur on Shabbat for capturing it. Yashakoach, there's a lot of words. You'll pick up, God willing, tomorrow morning at 7:30 from this Mishnah of a Tzvi. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you, Shavuot
Shabbat tov.
Take care. Not whether it's trapped or not.
What difference would it make if there's a lot or a few of those?
The difference would be that they're already trapped. It's like a deer that's wounded. Meaning if you can grab one out of the air, you're not chayav for tzeidah. Tzeidah means you take a wild thing, but if it's something that's readily available, which means either inside your courtyard and you can just grab it, or if, in this case, the chagavim, they're flying everywhere, then you didn't do anything to make it available to you. You can get it at any time. So it's not the act of grabbing the animal that's the issur of tzeidah. It's confining them. And so if they're already, now in this case, they're not confined, they're just everywhere. So it's considered that, mutar to grab it on Shabbat or to trap it on Shabbat.
So they're all, so to speak, trapped already because
Correct.
there's so many of them that they're
Correct.
trapping each other.
Meaning usually you can't get a bird or an animal unless you do an act to confine it. Here, because it's already available, you don't have the act of confining it is not chayav on Shabbat.
Okay.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone.
You're welcome. Thanks.